When is it too late to care about something that's important? The answer to this question is very different on the right and the left. Let's start with the left. When someone changes their mind about an issue, maybe Palestine, climate, Me Too, the prison system, immigration, whatever, the first response isn't, I'm glad you're here. Often it's, now you care? Where were you before? Oh, she's just hopping on a trend. But this doesn't happen on the right side, does it? In fact, they roll out the red carpet for converts. If someone says, I used to be a progressive, but now I believe in traditional values like saving the unborn and letting the living suffer, they don't get side-eyed, they get a podcast. They get a book deal. They get called brave.
Is it gatekeeping to expect people to have a moral compass? Welcome to Vanish Mode. Over the past few days, there's been a lot of discourse online about Gaza and welcoming people into a big tent. A bunch of liberal lawmakers and prominent figures have issued these mealy-mouthed statements, sort of lightly condemning Israel's campaign of mass starvation against people in Palestine. Content creators, especially those on the left, have said, well, we should welcome these liberal lawmakers for getting here. We should build a big tent, and we shouldn't criticize people who waited a couple years to even issue statements like this. I have some criticisms of that approach, and Jordan and I are going to discuss it today. How's it going, Jordan?
Well, it's going well, Taylor. It is certainly encouraging to see some people finally acknowledge what we have seen now for, sadly, 2 years in Gaza. But I'm with you. I don't think that people finally reaching this conclusion should not just be commended, but ushered to the forefront of a very important policy discussion, which I think is the consequence here. But I'm curious to hear your criticisms of this type of let's celebrate them, let's welcome them mindset.
I think that I have such a visceral kind of hate for these videos. I wouldn't consider myself like early to the Palestinian movement at all. I didn't really know much of anything about it prior to October 7th. And I definitely feel awful about that ignorance. But I also think we should have some sort of baseline standards of who's part of a progressive movement. And you hear this language, especially from these content creators on the left that are like, well, white supremacists and Nazis and fascists, they just welcome anyone in. They don't make anyone feel ashamed. They say, welcome, and you'll get a podcast. And I think that that's because being a Nazi or a fascist doesn't require any sort of moral clarity. And that movement doesn't sort of require anything of people other than to be hateful. And yeah, if you're willing to be hateful, yeah, you can be part of the movement. But if you want actual progress, I don't know. I think that you should sort of show that you won't make the same mistake again. You know what I mean? That you actually have solidarity this time.
Yes, there are a few different issues with that argument. First of all, if you're Black or Latino and you convert to the right, the Nazis are not going to welcome you. It's a very small subset of people that they want. It's kind of baked into their ideology. So I think using that as an example wasn't the best argument. And then there's this idea that people get rewarded on the right. Oh, they get podcasts and book deals and appearances, and they get celebrated. In reality, that's a slim few, and it's usually people who already had a big profile. So the right sees that they can use them to tap into their already existing audience. But as you and I have discussed, and I think many viewers understand, there is a lot more funding on the right for a media ecosystem, and a thriving one that is largely funded by billionaires and special interests, not because they're looking for people to join their side on a culture war issue, which is certainly something they focus on, but it's because they want those talking heads and those figures to serve as distractions to mislead people and to divert their attention away from the things that really matter, which are, in most cases, economic issues, issues about healthcare, reproductive justice, things that affect all of our lives and things that those billionaires and special interests benefit from. It's no mystery why fracking billionaires would invest heavily in an outlet like the Daily Wire, knowing that they will mislead people and confuse them and get them worked up over hollow culture war issues, because that's less time they can pay attention to issues like climate change.
Exactly. I think it's very silly. And I think that a lot of times the people on the left will be like, we actually need to imitate the right. Yeah, like we need to have no standards. The right has no standards. And so we need to have no standards. And that's just that's just a losing strategy. I think like of course you want to be empathetic to people and you don't want to like, if a climate change victim who voted for Trump is suffering, like yeah, you're not going to throw it in their face. Of course not. That would be cruel. That's what a lot of liberals did after the Texas floods. But I also think that you need to make sure that that person actually cares about the issue at hand, that they're not just caring about an issue because they're now personally affected by it, but that they also have the capacity to care about that issue when others are affected by it. Like the example in that one Instagram video that we saw earlier, she's talking about people who, well, now they've suffered the consequences of Trump's action and they want change, or they want, now they want to join the left ostensibly. But again, you have to make sure that those people actually care about issues. Like, not to say that they can't vote Democrat. That would be great if they did, right? Better than Trump. But if you're going to welcome them into like a political movement, I think that there should be somewhat of a higher bar.
If we're going to look at these legislators specifically, Cory Booker, for example, he's been on the receiving end of praise and accolades for simply acknowledging that there is a campaign of mass starvation, which is a war crime. When used as a weapon in war, starvation is a war crime. By acknowledging that, that's sufficient for many people. That doesn't materially or substantively change the circumstances in Gaza. He is somebody who has voted repeatedly to continue to arm Israel to make this possible. And just a couple weeks ago, while he tried to hide in the back of the group, he was photographed with Netanyahu. I'm sorry, I'm a little skeptical of people who were just with the guy committing the genocide, leading the campaign of mass starvation just a matter of weeks ago, 2 years into this. And now suddenly, when it is so undeniable that mainstream media and even some right-wing figures are unable to apologize for it anymore, that's not necessarily somebody who has had a change of heart. That's somebody who sees where the winds are blowing and is trying to take advantage of that.
I think Cory Booker is the perfect example of this, Jordan, and like what you're talking about, because like you said, it is this sort of like performative acknowledgement of, not even acknowledging that what they said was wrong or what they've done is wrong, because they're not changing their behavior. It's just sort of like they're just doing rhetoric to kind of like placate the left or placate, honestly, the people that have been calling out this genocide for years now. And I don't think that it's leading to any sort of systemic change. And that's what I mean. I think whether you're a person in power or whether you're just an average person who's going to sort of flip over and support this political movement, I think you should show some sort of willingness to change your behavior or change your actions in the future, or have solidarity in a broader way rather than just sort of thinking of yourself. And I'm talking about also just like people that like really want to sort of make themselves the voice of a movement. Anybody's welcome to like vote a different way, like I would have a far right person vote a different way if they want to support the right policies, sure. But I think if you're going to sort of quote unquote welcome people into a movement or champion people or allow people to become voices of that movement or have like sort of some active space in that movement, yeah, I think they should show some baseline level of solidarity with their actions.
That's a good point to focus on, because when these people talk about welcoming these folks into our movement or into the big tent, and then acknowledging later on, in this case, in that video, that many people are bitter because they were in a much more unsafe situation early on in this conflict to talk about it. And as we have seen over the past 2 years, students are being punished at school for protesting. Some are being expelled. If they are international students, they are at risk of deportation. We're seeing legislatures and states and even some people in the federal government talking about rewriting the definition of anti-Semitism to include criticism of Israel. It is a crackdown on free assembly and free speech, and some people lost their jobs for speaking out. You have groups like Canary Mission who single out young activists to try to prevent them from ever getting a job for speaking up. And AIPAC, the pro-Israel lobby in Washington, has been driving a lot of this. And when these same Democrats take money from AIPAC, do events with AIPAC, and ultimately support their broader mission, why would people who have been right and have been talking about this for 2 years, be willing to accept them, to trust them. These people acknowledging that there is starvation because mainstream media is putting pictures of starving children on the front pages doesn't mean that those legislators won't continue the other aspects of their work, continuing to arm Israel, continuing to support AIPAC's work in suppressing campus protests. These legislators criticized these protests, called for crackdowns. I totally understand why people would be skeptical. It's not gatekeeping, it's self-preservation.
Absolutely. And I also think that it's like, you need to acknowledge that the harm that you've done as well. Like, for instance, these lawmakers that have supported Israel for years, like if they are actually going to flip, they should acknowledge the fact that they have funded a genocide for multiple years. And as you said, pledge to not take money from AIPAC, pledge to kind of like break themselves free of these systems. Just the way that, by the way, the right does this too. I hate this idea that the right doesn't purity test, because the first thing they do is when they ask, when people quote unquote come over to their side is like, do you renounce everything you did? Aren't you sorry that you supported BLM? Like they make these people like rake themselves over the coals to, apologize for their role in whatever like woke culture, that they did for years. And I just think that like on the left, seeing these like sort of Democrat influencers or whoever just be like, well, we should just, we need a big tent and we should welcome these people in. Okay, again, welcome them in. Sure, they can vote a certain way. They can give money, they can support, but don't make them the face of the movement. Don't let them get any sort of platform, because as we saw after the Iraq war as well, we saw all these media pundits who supported the Iraq war and then later come out and say that they were against it, but they profited. They're the mainstream media people today. They're all like the mainstream media people today are pretty much in their positions of power because they supported the Iraq war, whereas the people that stood against the Iraq war were sidelined and pushed out of media. And I think that if you are going to sort of come in at the final moment, again, after everyone's lost their jobs, after students have, been expelled or whatever, and you have had no personal sacrifice, and now you want to be the voice of the movement, no, we should make people the voice of the movement that have actual moral clarity on these issues and have solidarity on these issues.
And I just saw a little bit ago, we're recording this on Tuesday, July 29th, Bernie Sanders is going to introduce a resolution and force a vote in the Senate this week to block arms deals to Israel. So now's your chance, Senate Democrats. Now's your chance. If you are genuinely concerned about the well-being of Palestinians in Gaza, here you go. Here is the one way you can positively affect change, because simply talking about it, simply condemning it, isn't enough when you are continuing to arm Israel.
Exactly. And I think it'll be so interesting to look at who votes for what. And I hope that vote follows these people into the midterms.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why a lot of people are skeptical of some of these Democrats now criticizing Israel. They didn't in 2024, they haven't until just now. But as midterms are starting to creep up, and then of course it's not too early for some people to start thinking about a presidential campaign in 2028, a few of them, I think, are starting to lay the foundation for a presidential run, and they know that would be a liability. Whether or not they would commit to a meaningful change in policy, especially when it comes to arming Israel, that remains to be seen. But Taylor, I'm not going to hold my breath.
I just hope that at least we can platform better influencers, and that these people that push this idea of a big tent and, welcoming anybody into the party, like, are not necessarily making those fair weather supporters big media personalities. I think we need a media that's willing to challenge power, even when it's uncomfortable and even when there are, consequences.
And we'll follow the results of that vote, and we'll be covering a lot more stories like this: how politics, how the news, how entertainment intersects with online culture, and the hottest stories of the week before they vanish. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.
Thanks for watching.